This has been such a wonderful day. It's included these really big picture conceptual perspectives along with the nitty-gritty of how do you do it on the ground. It's included research with practice. So I've enjoyed it enormously. I've learned a ton, got a lot more ideas perking around in my brain. So I hope I can be moderately coherent in summarizing what I heard as some big themes and a few key takeaways. So we all know that Raj Chetty's findings extend a substantial body of research on the importance of place. And Sean made the point at the beginning of the day that they really make a more compelling case of that evidence than we had been able to before, particularly for the unconvinced. Right? Here we now have really compelling evidence that every year of exposure to a more opportunity-rich community improves a child's chances of economic success as an adult. And that dovetails, I think, with other work that Pat Sharkey has done, showing that some of the effects of living in a profoundly distressed neighborhood extend across generations. So we're really thinking long-term about the prospects of our kids and the next generation. But we also recognize today that we need to know a lot more than we do now about the mechanisms inside the black box. What is it about neighborhoods that matters? And is that different for different categories of people? We raised the issue of, is it different for girls than boys, for example? And here I have to say, I really like it when the director of OMB says we need to invest more in research. I think one of the exciting things about Raj's return to the MTO experiment and the new findings we get when more time passes reminds us that when we're measuring phenomena that develop over a long period of time, we have to be willing to research outcomes over a long period of time, not give up after year 1 or year 2 or even year 10. I also really want to commend and thank Raj for making these data available to all the rest of us. You know, you do this big data manipulation, produce cool new indicators at the small geography level, and put that data out for other researchers to play around with. This is going to fuel a ton of new knowledge building, and I think it's fantastic. So we do know some things, I think, about mechanisms. We're not totally in the dark on the mechanisms. What is it about neighborhoods that matter? We know that we have strong evidence to believe that crime and violence are hugely important, that the public schools are hugely important, probably that early childhood educational opportunities at the neighborhood level are important. We're increasingly recognizing that the factors that affect health are probably going to play a role in the long-term impact on economic mobility. And then we've got somewhat squishier evidence about collective efficacy, social capital, cohesion, and the roles that those play. One of the things that was really encouraging to me about today is that I feel that too often this new evidence about the importance of place is being brought up to rehash that tired old people versus place argument. Is it mobility, or is it promote mobility or revitalize distressed communities? And Iana started the day saying both and. Sean echoed that, but then really through the whole day we were talking about balanced strategies and how do these pieces fit together to achieve our shared big goals. And I think it's useful to think back about the big structural forces that have gotten us into our current situation. Over many decades, public policies built neighborhoods of poverty and distress and blocked opportunity by simultaneously excluding poor families, especially families of color, from neighborhoods of opportunity, while also disinvesting in the neighborhoods where poor people, especially poor people of color, were clustered. So reversing the legacy of that long period of public policy and private market action, it seems to me so obvious that it requires combination strategies that tackle both the disinvestment and distress plaguing poor neighborhoods and the barriers that exclude low-income people from neighborhoods of opportunity. I liked Cheryl Cashin's language about combating opportunity hoarding. Really takes both kinds of strategies. I also think we recognized on and off over the course of the day, but it needs to be explicit, what a huge role race plays in this story. It's played in the history, and it plays going forward. We are addressing now a legacy of discrimination and segregation. And economic segregation is indeed on the rise these days across lines of race and ethnicity, but racial and ethnic segregation remain huge problems, and the fundamental problems I think we have to tackle. They amplify and perpetuate other forms of racial inequality and other systemic mechanisms through which inequality is perpetuated. Again, Cheryl Cashin said she should have entitled her book, Place is Race. So for a big chunk of this afternoon, we've been talking about the housing and neighborhood-focused strategies that we should be pursuing to address these issues. And we have all acknowledged, I think, that the solutions aren't just in housing and neighborhood strategy. We had a really good conversation about jobs. And I think everybody recognizes that without more jobs, decent paying jobs, housing and neighborhood strategies are going to run into a brick wall. But I think we also said if we didn't address these profound barriers to opportunity in neighborhoods, a full employment strategy wouldn't achieve all that we would want for it. So I think over the course of the day, we really talked from a housing and neighborhoods perspective about doing 5 things at the same time and for a long time. Dose. And the first is investing in the most urgent needs of poor neighborhoods: safety, good schools, healthy places to play, access to jobs. So kids who live in those neighborhoods can get a foothold on a ladder toward economic success. And part of that investment may involve connecting the people who live in those neighborhoods to opportunities elsewhere. Kathy O'Regan talks about this as making place matter less, making the neighborhood you are in matter less. So school assignment and enrollment zone policies, transportation policies, car access, car sharing policies. We also talked about the fact that neighborhoods aren't static, that we get trapped into a sense that neighborhoods are one thing and that's what they're going to be. And instead we have to recognize and plan for and respond to the dynamism going on in neighborhoods. So when our work addressing the severe challenges in distressed neighborhoods begins to pay off, maybe even before it begins to pay off, we have to ensure that the original residents of that neighborhood and people like them can afford to stay in that neighborhood. So that means preserving affordable housing and taking other steps we talked about to avoid displacement. And so that links closely to the third thing of 5 we need to do at the same time, which is to look for ways to preserve affordable housing, whether it's assisted or not, in neighborhoods that are undergoing gentrification or have undergone gentrification and are low poverty and high opportunity. So there we have the evidence that a big share of the subsidized stock and a big share of the subsidized stock at risk of loss is in high opportunity neighborhoods. So component 4 then is eliminating the barriers that block poor families, especially poor families of color, from finding affordable places to live in neighborhoods of their choice. And that means building or acquiring low and moderately priced housing in every neighborhood, city and suburb, through combinations of fair share mandates, inclusionary zoning, low-income housing tax credit, allocation strategies, cool new mechanisms for lower cost financing, and Carol Galante's point, starting to look at what can we do with single-family rentals. And finally, helping poor families, the poor families who want to move to safe neighborhoods with good schools and other opportunity-enhancing amenities. And we talked a lot about the lessons we've learned from intensive assisted housing mobility strategies that combine portable housing vouchers with landlord outreach, with incentives, with real good mobility counseling, and with search assistance. And Barbara included action recommendations in her folder for broadening that kind of work beyond a few places like Baltimore, Chicago, and Dallas that have really made intensive investments. And one of the issues that got put on the table in one of the lunch conversations was thinking about regionalizing the administration of the housing voucher program because the balkanized way in which it is currently administered kind of gets in the way of it's living up to its full potential even when we can't provide all that extra mobility assistance. So I also felt it when we think about doing all 5 of these things at the same time and for a long period of time, we inevitably get discouraged about scale. So I think we have to care about scale and care about sustained effort over a long time. But I also really liked Cheryl Cashin's term, well, at least we can build some mini utopias. And then they become examples of what's possible. And they begin to help us overcome the public sense that mixed or integrated places are scary or mixed and integrated places are impossible. So this leads me to thinking about how we need to push our frame of reference here up from neighborhood to citywide or even region-wide. That too often we're having these conversations about individual investment options or ideas one at a time. Should I launch an assisted housing mobility program? Should I preserve affordable housing in this gentrifying neighborhood, or is this the one that's going to gentrify next and I ought to get in there? How can I transform this particularly distressed community? When really we need to be thinking about a much more deliberate citywide process, really a citywide or region-wide vision for tackling concentrated poverty and neighborhood distress. Not one housing development at a time, or one neighborhood at a time, but what's going on in this city that we need to tackle, which will certainly decide on some portfolio of the approaches that I talked about. And I've been trying to argue that we should call that kind of work place conscious. It's not all place-based in the boundaries. It's about outcomes for people, but it's always conscious of the importance of place in the lives of people. Sean made the point, and we followed up on it a bunch of times, that a lot of the levers for this kind of work are at the city or state level. And so we need to build the capacity of advocacy at the city and state level, and we need to build the institutional capacity to do this work at the local level. And it is at the local level that we are most likely to get some traction on working across silos, engaging the mechanisms in the Affordable Care Act, thinking about economic development strategy along with an anti-poverty strategy. So that takes us to the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule, which I think a lot of us feel has the potential to incentivize this kind of portfolio approach at the local, maybe even the regional level. it isn't going to sort of work by magic. It provides data and it challenges local policymakers to address the evidence about segregation and inequality of opportunity in their cities. It challenges them to use their federal resources to tackle those. It's going to take concerted work by advocates and institution building over time to make that set of incentives, that framework, really pay off. But on my most optimistic days, I really think that over 20 years, if the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule survives the change of administration and is implemented intelligently, both big ifs, that we could be talking about a really different geography of opportunity in our country 20 years from now. So part of what encouraged me about the constructive sense of balanced strategies in this room today is that this is a room full of people who can work together to help HUD implement this rule intelligently and have it really start to work for the country. So we didn't spend a whole lot of time on the political challenges. That's not my expertise. I'm a Pollyanna of the first order. But we do know that, this is really politically challenging work. The lines of race and class are what we're talking about disrupting and changing, and this is really, really hard. But people are disturbed about the widening inequality gaps in our country, and people are disturbed by the felt barriers to upward mobility for themselves and for their kids. And we now have more compelling evidence than we've ever had before that place is part of that story. So I feel like there's a window of opportunity here to really build support for strategies that systematically address the intersection of poverty, place, and race in our country, and that make the case that this is not just about compassion and justice, which it is, but also about the future economic prosperity of our country. So I hope what we're talking about is, I think, again, I'm going to cite Sean, who said he is also a Pollyanna. He thinks we're going to look back 20 years, look back to today, and think of this time as a turning point when we start to really combine research and knowledge building with innovative, optimistic practice on the ground to pursue strategies, and continuously perfect strategies that tackle both the disinvestment and the distress plaguing high-poverty neighborhoods and the barriers that exclude low-income people and people of color from neighborhoods where the opportunities are great. So, thanks.
So, Marge, that was amazing. I mean, that was really amazing. I have seen Marge do this before, which is why I asked her to do this, but I'm blown away. So thank you. I also want to thank the facilitators of the lunch discussions who I think helped inform Marge's remarks. And let's hear it again for all of the speakers who made this conference so enlightening. So everyone on the center's housing and communications teams and the leadership of the center and of our policy futures work, particularly in the area of poverty and opportunity, contributed to making this conference a success. Believe me, I did not do this alone. But it would not have been possible without months of work by Shania Owens and Alicia Mazzara of the housing team, and Larry Haas, Regan LaChapelle, Carolyn Anderson, and Edward Bremner of the comms team. You have been great people to work with. I'm not sure I ever want to do anything like this again, but if I did, I would want to work with you. And my very special thanks to Melissa Torres of Bond Events, who kept us all on track and enabled us to provide the conference experience we aimed for. And finally, thanks to all of you for your interest in digging into the issues of poverty in place and your commitment to alleviating poverty and increasing economic mobility. Since I began work at the center 18 years ago, I have been hoping to be able to create real dialogue among people focused on issues broadly related to poverty on the one hand, and those who focus mostly on poor places, as so many housing activists do. Today's conference has really fulfilled my hopes about jump-starting this vital conversation and deepening it. And I am hopeful that it will bring greater commitment to address place-related challenges as an integral part of our anti-poverty policies. And with that, now let's continue the conversation with some refreshments.